Don't you just love when you find the perfect piece at a great price at a thrift store or antique shop? Well, today I'm taking you on a thrifting adventure, and I'll share the top 11 things that I'm currently looking for. I'll also show you everything I bought and how I styled it in my home. Some of my finds needed a little DIY love, so I'll also share how I repurposed them to fit my style. So, if you love vintage decor as much as I do, let's get started.
I can't resist a beautiful or interesting vintage book, so I'm always checking them out at both thrift stores and antique stores. I have several books from this 1930s set, and I wasn't sure if I had this one or not, and it turns out I don't. So I wish I would have bought it. And I almost bought this book about Lincoln, but then I remembered that I had actually read it already. So instead, I ended up buying this small religious book. Both the leather cover and the text are absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, it's written in what looks like German, so I can't read a word of it. If anyone can read it, I'd love to know more about it. At a large antique mall in Elizabeth, Illinois, I bought a large, battered old dictionary with an 1895 copyright. Even though the cover was detached, I thought it was a great deal for only $8. I also purchased this 1924 Lincoln Library of Essential Information for just $3. It contains encyclopedic information that will be interesting to thumb through. I have my vintage and antique reference books on my desk, so I did a bit of rearranging to fit in my two new finds. And that's when I realized the dictionary cover actually belonged to a completely different dictionary. So mine was actually missing its cover, which explains the low price for a book that's 129 years old. But you know, I don't care that it has no cover. And you also know that I can't waste that other cover with its red leather and lovely embossed pattern. So I looked through my stash of picture frames and found a vintage one that was a perfect size for the book cover. I just needed to cut about 1/8 of an inch off the top and bottom edges for it to fit in the picture opening. To cover the words in the center of the book cover, I printed out a vintage image of a woman riding a horse. I thought her red dress would complement the red leather nicely. I used my favorite Elmer's Craft Bond glue stick on the back of the cardstock to adhere the picture in the center of the book cover. To give it a more finished look, I hot glued some thin black velvet ribbon around the edges of the paper. I'm loving velvet ribbon right now, so I bought 2 variety sets when they were on sale at Hobby Lobby. To attach the book cover in the frame, I first applied a bead of hot glue around the edges on the back side. Then I cut a piece of poster board to cover it and used a staple gun to attach it to the wood trim. Then I cut a piece of brown craft paper to fit over the poster board to cover the staples and adhered it with glue stick. And finally, I attached a sawtooth hanger. I brushed some black wax on the frame to condition the dry old wood and to conceal some of the scratches and dents. Originally, I thought I would probably sell this, but I love how it looks on my plaid fabric living room walls. In addition to books, I'm also always on the lookout for vintage wall art. To identify old and possibly antique art, look for signs of wear, fading, and discoloration. If you're not sure, look at the back of the frame to see if it's made from wood or very heavy cardboard. also look at how the backing is held in place. However, you might find an older piece of artwork in a newer frame, like this 1953 calendar. Antique frames are usually thick wood and often ornate, but some mid-century frames are ornate plastic, like these Pinky and Blue Boy pictures. This huge plastic peacock is another example of mid-century wall art. It's amazing, but it's really not my style. But this ornately framed print literally stopped me in my tracks. But I wasn't prepared to pay $135, so I left it. But later I showed it to my husband, and he grabbed it and bought it as my anniversary gift. Does anyone remember what he bought me for our anniversary last year from the same antique mall? I'll show you a couple of my anniversary gifts later in the video. You may notice that I moved the faux fireplace in my bedroom back to its original spot between the windows. My husband didn't like it on his side of the bed because he was afraid he would bump into it in the dark. And since he rarely expresses an opinion about decor, I let him have his way. I think the picture looks perfect on the fireplace, and every time I look at it, I'm reminded of how lucky I am to have such a thoughtful husband. I thought this $35 print was overpriced, but I loved the thick dark wood frame and especially the little Cocker Spaniel. I'm always drawn to older wood items. Look at the patina on what the tag calls an antique coin tray. If I could have thought of a use for this, I totally would have bought it. I also like this cute wall shelf and this small Sirocco shelf. Sirocco was actually made from a mixture of wood pulp and resin and poured into molds. It was made mostly during the first half of the 20th century. The flathead screws on the back are another indicator of an older wood piece. I placed this ornate little shelf under my new vintage portrait and added a porcelain dog figurine that I thrifted locally for just $4. I got a great deal on the Sirocco shelf, but I got an even better deal on this antique Eastlake shelf. I only paid $3 at my local Goodwill, and it sells for almost $100 online. I also snagged this vintage sewing basket or magazine rack at Goodwill for less than $5, and it's selling online for $50 to $100. I'm thinking about painting or refinishing it, but I'm just not sure. So let me know what you think. I bought one other vintage wood piece. It was only $3 and was clearly handmade. An old consignment tag called it an antique comb case, which makes sense because the two side pieces look like a mustache to me. And I think those mustache shapes are the reason the shelf didn't originally sell. And I don't like them either. So I used my jigsaw to cut them off along the edge of the case. And I think it looks so much better. It was giving me cottage vibes with the cute scalloped edge along the front. So I gave it 2 coats of off-white chalk paint. Then I chose a few floral rub-on transfers from IOD's Fairy Tale Florals package. I just used the plastic applicator that comes in the package, and the transfers quickly and easily adhered to the paint. I even thought about using a transfer on the mirror, but I changed my mind. I used a little sandpaper to distress the edges and bring out the design on the mirror's frame. Then I brushed on a coat of clear wax to protect both the paint and the rub-on transfers. I think this project turned out so cute, and it could be used in a variety of ways. I actually think it would make a great spot for keys and a phone charger. I love vintage metals, and I especially love the warm tones of vintage brass. But apparently, a lot of other people like it too because it's getting much harder to find and it's getting way more expensive. Aren't these brass and green sconces just amazing? I did find a brass angel candlestick for just $3, and I'm going to use it as fall decor. I stuck some pip berries through her arms and wrapped the candle cup with Spanish moss to look like a bird's nest and glued a tiny bird on top. I'm going to keep an eye out for more of these brass angels because I want to use them in a similar way for Christmas decor. In a recent video, I used the base of a vintage oil lamp to create a Victorian vivarium. So I was thrilled to find one brass and one silver oil lamp at the Elizabeth Antique Mall for just $6 and $5 each. And now I'm going to use the silver one to create a fall-themed vivarium. At some point, it had been converted to an electric lamp, so I removed all the inner parts. Then I used a cutting blade on my angle grinder to cut off the center pipe. I didn't speed up the video. That's how quickly this tool cuts through metal. Next, I stuffed styrofoam into the center opening, and then I began covering the top of the lamp with fluffy reindeer moss. If you tear the moss into small pieces and glue them on individually, you can cover a large area with just a small amount of moss. I topped the lamp with a glass cloche taken from a thrifted anniversary clock, and then I used a razor blade to cut off any moss that was outside the cloche. To create a fall vignette, I took apart a thrifted candle ring and twisted parts of it into a smaller ring and used a florist pin to attach it to the styrofoam. Next, I poked a hole in the styrofoam where I could attach a seed pod taken from an old bag of potpourri, and then I glued a small bird to the seed pod. I thought the arrangement needed some height, so I went outside and grabbed a dead branch from my lilac bush and stuck it in the styrofoam. I noticed some of the paint was missing on the small orange berries, so I touched up those spots with some orange chalk paint. I'm not sure if this actually qualifies as a vivarium because there are no real animals or insects inside, but I like it anyway. I love collecting vintage trunks and suitcases and using them as end tables, as storage at the end of a bed, as risers, or just as decor. I think some of the red metal ones like this were sold as doll storage cases. Well, did you guess that I bought the most worn one? All the leather adornments were still in place, so I thought $15 was a good price. And I love these two suitcases together as a side table. I've always loved quilts, and lately you can sometimes find them at really great prices, but those in perfect condition can still be very pricey. I think I've always appreciated needlepoint, but I've only recently started to specifically look for it at thrift and antique stores. I think the addition of needlework turns something ordinary into something really special, and I can never resist a pretty needlepoint pillow. As I get older, I'm more attracted to unique china and dishware, but I only buy it when I find a great deal, like this small pitcher or creamer with a picture from Charles Dickens' Oliver.
Please, sir, I want some more.
Small pieces like this make great vessels for thrift store flowers or even leaves from your yard. By now, we all know that thrift store baskets are a great deal, and since they can be used in multiple ways, they're always worth checking out. I've mentioned before that I much prefer the delicate and intricate hand weaving of vintage baskets over the machine weaving used to mass-produce modern baskets. In addition to baskets, there are a lot of other great storage options that you can thrift that are so much more interesting and pretty than plastic containers from Walmart or Dollar Tree. I'm particularly partial to vintage wood boxes, especially those with beautiful carving. And I love to use them as risers on bookshelves. I often stack 2 or 3 of them together. Luckily for me, I started collecting blue and white china before it became ultra popular, so I bought my collection at dirt cheap prices. But my eyes still seem to spot it at every thrift and antique store I visit, and sometimes I still find items at reasonable prices, like this set of salt and pepper shakers for $7 and this Royal Copenhagen pin tray for $4, which I'm going to use as a spoon rest. I also found this blue Delft decanter for only $4. I did some research, but unfortunately, I couldn't find much information about it. However, it is selling for $30 to $60 online. One of the blue and white plates on my dining room wall recently fell and broke into several pieces. So I bought a replacement, and it even came with the plate hanger attached. But while I was adjusting it, I dropped it and it broke into 2 pieces. So I just grabbed the super glue and put it back together. I think it looks fine, and even close up, you can barely see the crack. If you know me, then you know I'm a sucker for clocks. I love to use unique and vintage ones for decor, and I love to use cheap thrift store finds for upcycling projects. I saw several beautiful clocks at the antique stores, but they were all more than I like to spend. But I did buy a solid oak mantel clock at Goodwill for under $5 that I plan to repurpose in an upcoming video. I spotted several one-of-a-kind items at the antique stores, like this toy horse turned lamp and this vintage talcum powder lamp. I want to try making something similar, so I need to find the perfect 10. Someone had covered a canister with pebbles and shells and painted it red. I thought it was really interesting. One booth was selling mannequin arms. I'm sure someone could use these in their Halloween decor. I also thought this homemade rope dispenser was neat and something that I could possibly recreate. But this salt and pepper candelabra was by far my favorite one-of-a-kind item, and I can't believe I didn't buy it. However, I did buy this random metal piece that I think is from an old light fixture. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, so please let me know if you have any ideas. I hope you found some inspiration in today's video for using vintage decor in your home. And if you'd like to see even more ideas on how I use thrift store finds in my home, here's another video I think you'll like. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you next week.